Hello, I'm Tim, the creator of CtrlAltDel. This video features the comic I drew for September 22nd, 2014. It's sped up by a little over 1,000%. I figured about 15-20 minutes was the maximum I would ask people to sit through a video. So the basis for this strip comes from the Final Fantasy 15 trailer that debuted a few days ago at TGS 2014. The four pretty protagonists spend most of the trailer tooling around in this giant black car. And all I could think of while watching it was that one scene from Zoolander, the one right before the gasoline fight. Um, so that image was sort of the foundation for the comic strip. I wasn't entirely sure that single panel was enough to carry the strip on its own. So I started riffing on the idea of the whole game taking place inside the car and what the fights might look like, if that were the case. What would a random encounter consist of if you're just driving around the entire time? That's where I came up with this idea of the random encounter being like maybe a speed trap, with maybe the cop writing a ticket as his attack move. Um, and so you can see here what I was doing is, obviously I'm drawing the two police officers, but those two boxes down at the bottom are just placeholder spaces for, the UI I had planned to add, the Final Fantasy UI. And I was going with, the very old school Final Fantasy UI, the big blue boxes with the white borders and the, attack, item, magic, selection bar. Uh, because even though I realized that at this point the Final Fantasy games, have wildly unique and much different UIs, that very classic UI immediately says Final Fantasy to a lot of people, and so that's why I had opted to use that one. But anyway, so this has really ended up being two sort of separate, disconnected ideas that I was going to attempt to mesh into a single strip because, again, I wasn't convinced either of them stood well enough alone. Where the gag really would have shown with some animation and sound effects to drive home that random encounter trigger. I had to make it work with a static image. So the original plan was to separate these two panels with, either an onomatopoeia for that random encounter sound effect, or even just a very big, colorful, and literal random encounter phrase. And you can see that where I kind of roughed that in between the two panels. That would have been added in Photoshop later on. So as I worked on the strip, I began to feel like the first panel was what I really wanted to say. And while the second panel and the idea of it amused me, it was feeling just sort of tacked on, and I didn't feel like I was doing the concept justice. Again, I feel like uh, that would work better with uh, some other audio visual elements to it, which again is just falls a little bit outside my wheelhouse and outside the time constraints for doing this comic strip. So um, I drew the artwork out to completion, as you'll see, all the way through to colors, because a lot can change your perspective once you've finished a piece and can kind of step back from it and look at the whole thing. And I wanted to give myself the opportunity to change my mind. It's better to have the extra panel and cut it before release than to be lying in bed that night and decide, you know what, I do want that. I do really like that idea and I do want that in there, and then not have that artwork available to kind of stick back in. Um, so in this case, I mean, if you've seen the uploaded comic at this point, you know that I did end up deciding to lose that second panel and just let the concept stand on its own for let the comic stand on that one, on the Zoolander riff idea. And I'm sure that everybody will have varying opinions on whether or not that was the right call, but at least this way I kind of get to show you, uh, you know, what the other direction might have been. So even if it's not in the archive and quote unquote canon, you at least saw it, and maybe the idea amused you or whatnot. So now, if you've been watching, you'll see that this is a pretty typical process for one of my daily strips. What I'll do is kind of rough out the panels first and foremost. Actually, first and foremost, usually I lay down my dialogue, but this really didn't have much dialogue. I didn't decide to add the orange mocha frappuccino until the very end. So originally this had no dialogue whatsoever. Otherwise, that would have been the very first step. But once I've roughed out my panels, I do some very rough sketching with a light blue color, which is really just a throwback to the days when I used to pencil on paper, and I would use this a special pencil called it was a non-photo blue pencil, and it was just what it was a shade of blue that would not get picked up by scanners and copiers. So you could pencil with this particular shade of blue, and then just ink directly over the pencil without having to erase all of your pencil mark. Because when you went to scan it in, the computer would not grab that blue. So I mean, at this point, now that I'm doing it digitally, that first initial could be green, it could be purple, it could be whatever. I just stick with blue, just I don't know, maybe a nostalgia or whatever. So I lay down my roughs, my figure forms in that light blue, and then I go back in on a second layer and kind of start putting in detail. And then from there, it's obviously onto inks. And at this point, I mean, for at least for the daily strips, most of my real detail work comes in at the inking. I mean, the pencils right now are just to kind of give me a framework, to work off of, and I do a lot of my actual work on the final with the final inks, and then it's just a matter of cleaning everything up, save it up, and then we export to Photoshop for the color. And again, so for the daily strips, typically I do maybe 3 layers for the colors. So I have my flats layer, which is what I'm doing right now, flatting out all the colors. And then I'll do one, basic. Basic is 1 layer of shadows, 1 layer of highlights. Sometimes I'll do 2 layer of highlights if I want backlights, or if the scene calls for some specific lighting. And then with more complex artwork, wallpapers or whatnot. If I'm working on a wallpaper and I'm gonna spend a week on it, I may end up with like 6 shadow layers and 10 highlight layers. I mean, who knows? But for the daily strips, it's pretty much it's kind of streamlined at this point. So looking at it now, I know that I was working off of an image, a reference image for these 4 Final Fantasy characters, and I got a few of the details wrong. That guy in the back with the goatee is apparently he's supposed to be shirtless, but whatever. I know someone's going to call me out on it. Somebody called me out the other day because I drew Zero from Borderlands with 5 fingers instead of 4, which is just was ironic to me because for so many years, the first decade or whatever, I drew all of my characters with 4 fingers, and very rarely did anybody even notice. But I do one character with too many fingers, and I had like half a dozen people calling me out on it. So whatever. Yeah, I got a few of the details of these characters wrong, but I was working off of the trailer in motion, what I saw from the trailer. So, it's a shame that I didn't end up using the second panel here. Well, I mean, I guess, let me rephrase. It's a shame that I, took the time to do it and ended up cutting it, but that happens sometimes, like I said, it's like even up until this point when I was coloring it, I was still thinking like, well, maybe I'm going to make this work. I wasn't quite sure because my natural inclination is to put out like a full size strip, like a uh, and I think that if I had known I was going to just do the one panel, I probably would have made that one panel a little bit larger and spent a little bit more time on that one panel in the detail department. But what are you going to do? In the end, I think it's as tough as it can be sometimes to cut stuff. It's just necessary. So you can see here what I'm doing is, I create a layer, I duplicate the layer, the flats layer, and then darken it. And then what I do is actually cut away, so whereas I used to go in with a paintbrush and color in all the shadows, now what I do is I shade the entire layer and then I just cut away where the light is hitting. And it's a time-saving tool because there's less selecting different colors with the eyedropper tool. I mean, you're still, I mean, it's not saving like a ton of work, but it adds up. If you're coloring, like this one's only 2 panels, but if I've got 4 or 5 or 6 panels on a page, or the more characters I have in a comic strip, the more colors that you have, and then so doing shadows for all of the individual sections of their outfits and whatnot, I'd be constantly going back and forth to the eyedropper tool to pick up the flats layer, shade darker on that layer, go grab a different color, the skin tone, the hair, the shirt, whatever. And then so you can see after the shadows, I do the hard highlights. Again, for the daily strip, I typically only do hard highlights. The longer I'm spending on a piece of artwork, and the more layers I'm going to do, I'll do gradiented highlights and stuff like that. So you can see here, I'm kind of starting to do those menu boxes, those classic old school Final Fantasy menu boxes. And I think it was right around here where I am looking at the 2 panels and feeling like they're really disconnected, and where I'm thinking that whereas I really enjoy the concept of the first panel and kind of poking fun at the trailer for what, in that way, I'm then feeling like the second panel is, while it's amusing, it's not quite as amusing, and I don't want the comic to start high and then end low, if that makes sense. And so it's right around here is where I've decided that I think I'm just going to stick with the initial panel. So yeah, I mean, you know what? So if you've enjoyed this, if you'd like to see me do more of these videos, sound off in the comments. Certainly don't forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.